Rain tapped relentlessly against the cracked windows of the small oncology clinic, streaking the glass in uneven lines that blurred the gray world outside. The sky had been heavy all morning, but now it seemed to have given up entirely, pouring down in a steady, unbroken curtain. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and damp coats. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, humming with an irritating persistence that made everything feel colder, harsher. Daniel sat hunched in a rigid plastic chair that creaked every time he shifted his weight. The waiting room was nearly empty, just an elderly man coughing quietly into a handkerchief in the corner and a young woman staring blankly at her phone, her leg bouncing with nervous energy. A muted television hung on the wall, cycling through health tips no one was watching. In Daniel's hands was a thin folder, its edges worn from being opened and closed too many times in the past week. Inside were the reports that had changed everything: blood tests, scans, the doctor's notes written in careful, clinical handwriting. Words like malignant, rapid progression, and urgent intervention required stared back at him every time he dared to look. He didn't look now. He already knew them by heart. His thumb traced the corner of the top page, over and over, as if the motion could smooth out the reality written there. His body felt strange, too heavy and too light at the same time. A dull ache pulsed deep in his bones, and even sitting upright had become an effort. But it wasn't the pain that frightened him the most. It was time. Mr. Daniel, a voice called. He looked up sharply, blinking as if pulled from underwater. A nurse stood in the doorway, her expression neutral but not unkind. Yes, he said, his voice catching slightly as he stood. His legs wobbled for a moment before steadying. Please come with me. He followed her down a narrow hallway lined with closed doors and faded posters about early detection and healthy living. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had always been careful, always tried to do the right things. And yet here he was. The nurse led him into a small office and gestured for him to sit. The administrator will be with you shortly. Daniel nodded, lowering himself into the chair opposite a pristine white desk. The room was spotless to the point of discomfort. Everything had its place, pens aligned, papers stacked neatly, a computer screen glowing softly. It felt less like a place of healing and more like a place where decisions were made without emotion. He exhaled slowly, trying to steady his breathing. In his mind, images flickered uninvited. His daughter, Sana, laughing as she ran through the small courtyard outside their home. The way she would tug at his sleeve when she wanted his attention. The way she had looked at him just yesterday, her big eyes filled with trust. You'll be okay, Baba, she had said, as if it were a simple fact. You always are. He had smiled, even as something inside him broke. The door opened, pulling him back to the present. A woman in her 40s entered, dressed sharply in a tailored suit that seemed out of place in the modest clinic. She carried his file in one hand, already flipping through it as she sat down behind the desk. Mr. Daniel, she said without looking up. Yes. She turned a page, then another, her expression unchanged. I've reviewed your case. Daniel leaned forward slightly, hope and fear tangling together in his chest. Then you know I need to start treatment immediately. The doctor said. Yes, she interrupted smoothly. Chemotherapy is recommended. However, before we proceed, there are financial requirements that must be met. The words landed with a familiar weight, but he pushed forward anyway. I understand. That's why I came prepared. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slightly crumpled envelope, placing it carefully on the desk as if it were something fragile, something important. It's not everything, he admitted, his voice tightening. But it's a significant portion. I can pay the rest in installments. I'll work, I'll borrow, whatever it takes. I just need to begin treatment now. The administrator's gaze finally shifted to the envelope, but she made no move to touch it. Our policy requires full payment in advance, she said. Her tone was calm, practiced, devoid of any personal inflection. Daniel felt his stomach drop. But that's not possible for me right now. That's why I'm asking for some flexibility. Please, I'm not refusing to pay. I understand your situation, she replied, though her expression suggested otherwise. But exceptions cannot be made. He stared at her, searching her face for something, anything, that resembled understanding. If we wait, the cancer will spread. You've seen the reports. She closed the file gently. I have. Then how can you? Sir, she said, her voice firm but still eerily composed, we have procedures in place to ensure fairness for all patients. If we make an exception for you, we must do so for everyone. The logic felt cold, distant, almost unreal. I'm not everyone, Daniel said, his voice cracking despite his effort to stay composed. I'm a father. I have a daughter who needs me. I don't have months to figure this out. The room seemed to shrink around him. The administrator folded her hands neatly on the desk. I'm sorry. The words were automatic, empty. Daniel's chest tightened. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. He looked down at the envelope, at the money he had scraped together by selling what little he owned, by asking for help he never thought he would need. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. I'll die, he said quietly, the reality finally breaking through his last defenses. The administrator didn't respond. Her silence was confirmation. Something inside him gave way then, not dramatically, not with tears or shouting, but with a quiet, devastating collapse. The kind that left nothing behind. He nodded slowly, more to himself than to her, and reached for the envelope. His fingers trembled as he pulled it back, tucking it into his jacket like it no longer mattered. Thank you for your time, he murmured, the words hollow. She inclined her head slightly, already turning her attention back to the file as if the conversation had never happened. Daniel stood, his movements slow and unsteady. The room blurred slightly, but he forced himself to walk, to keep going. The hallway felt longer this time, the air heavier. No one stopped him. No one asked if he was okay. The waiting room looked exactly the same as before, but it felt different now, distant, like something he was already leaving behind. He pushed the door open and stepped outside. The rain hit him immediately, cold and relentless, soaking through his clothes within seconds. He didn't bother with his umbrella. He didn't bother with anything. He just stood there on the steps, letting the water run down his face, mixing with tears he hadn't realized had begun to fall. Cars passed by, their tires hissing against the wet road. People hurried along the sidewalks, heads down, focused on their own lives, their own problems. The world kept moving. Daniel stared ahead, his mind strangely quiet now. The fear, the desperation, they had all been replaced by something else. Something heavier. Final. Then, faintly at first, he heard it. A low, distant rumble. It blended with the thunder for a moment, but it grew steadily louder, deeper, more defined. Engines. Not one, many. Daniel turned his head slowly, his attention pulled toward the sound despite himself. Through the curtain of rain, headlights began to appear, cutting through the gray like sharp lines of light. One after another, motorcycles emerged, their presence impossible to ignore. They moved together, a unified line, their engines echoing off the buildings as they approached the clinic. Daniel frowned slightly, confusion flickering through the numbness. The bikes rolled to a stop right in front of him, water splashing beneath their tires. Engines idled, vibrating through the air. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. Then, one by one, the riders removed their helmets. And the man at the center looked straight at him. The clinic doors didn't just open, they slammed inward with a force that cracked through the sterile quiet like thunder. The sharp sound snapped every head in the room toward the entrance. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to shrink back for a moment. Victor stepped inside first. Rainwater dripped steadily from the edges of his worn leather jacket, leaving dark marks on the polished floor. His boots echoed with slow, deliberate weight as he crossed the threshold, his presence alone enough to unsettle the carefully controlled atmosphere of the clinic. Behind him, the others followed, one after another, forming a line that stretched back to the door. Their jackets bore patches faded by time, their expressions serious, focused, and unyielding. The receptionist froze, her hand still hovering over a keyboard. A pen slipped from her fingers and rolled off the desk, unnoticed. Excuse me, she managed, her voice thin, strained. You can't just, this is a medical facility. Victor didn't even glance her way. His eyes were fixed ahead. The administrator stood up from behind her desk the moment she saw them approaching, her posture stiffening as she tried to regain control of the situation. The calm authority she had displayed earlier returned, but this time it carried an edge of unease. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave, she said sharply. This is highly inappropriate. Victor stopped just inches from her desk. Up close, he seemed even larger, his presence pressing into the space between them. He removed his gloves slowly, deliberately, as if every movement had purpose. We're here about the man you turned away, he said. The administrator's jaw tightened. I don't discuss patient matters with strangers. You'll make an exception. Her eyes flashed, but there was hesitation now, just a flicker, but enough to show the crack forming beneath her composed exterior. No, I won't. Whatever issue you think you have, this is not how you handle it. Victor tilted his head slightly, studying her, not with anger, but with something far more unsettling, certainty. Then let's not waste time pretending, he said quietly. You denied him treatment because he couldn't pay in full. That right? Her lips parted, then pressed together again. We have policies. Legal ones. Binding ones. And humanity. One of the bikers behind Victor muttered. The administrator ignored him. We operate within a system. Without structure, everything collapses. Victor nodded slowly, as if acknowledging her point. Structure's fine, he said. But not when it buries people. She crossed her arms, clinging to what authority she had left. If he cannot pay, we cannot treat him. It's that simple. A heavy silence settled over the room. Then Victor reached into his jacket. The movement was slow enough that no one flinched, but deliberate enough that everyone watched. He pulled out a thick envelope, worn at the edges, and placed it on the desk with a solid, unmistakable thud. The sound echoed. The administrator's eyes dropped to it despite herself. Then another biker stepped forward. Without a word, he placed his own envelope beside Victor's. Then another. And another. The line continued, each man stepping forward, each one adding to the growing pile. The soft thuds blended into a steady rhythm, filling the room with something heavier than sound. The receptionist's mouth fell open. A nurse in the hallway took a step closer, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. Within moments, the desk was covered in envelopes, different sizes, different conditions, but all carrying the same unmistakable weight. Victor rested his hands lightly on the edge of the desk. Count it, he said. The administrator didn't move at first. Her composure had fractured now, uncertainty replacing the rigid certainty she had held before. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she reached out and picked up the nearest envelope. Her fingers hesitated before opening it. When she did, her expression shifted, just slightly, but enough. The glimpse of cash inside was undeniable. She set it down and opened another. And another. Each one told the same story. This, she began, her voice no longer as steady. This is highly irregular. Victor's gaze didn't waver. So is turning away a man who doesn't have time to wait. Her eyes flicked up to his, searching for something, intimidation, anger, recklessness, but found none. Just resolve. You can't just walk in here and. We just did, one of the bikers said quietly. The administrator straightened, grasping at procedure like a lifeline. Even if this covers the cost, there are protocols. Paperwork. Verification. Do it, Victor cut in. Every form, every signature. We'll wait. The room held its breath. Near the entrance, Daniel stood frozen, his soaked clothes clinging to him, his mind struggling to catch up with what was happening. He had followed them in without realizing it, drawn by something he didn't understand. Now he stared at the pile of envelopes as if they might disappear if he blinked. This isn't real, he whispered to himself. Victor turned slightly, just enough to glance at him. It is. Daniel shook his head, stepping forward slowly. Why? You don't even know me. A faint smile tugged at the corner of Victor's mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. Don't need to. That's not an answer. Victor exhaled, his shoulders shifting as if carrying something unseen. A long time ago, he said, I was the one sitting where you are. Different place, same story. No money, no options. The room remained silent, listening. Someone stepped in, he continued. Didn't ask who I was. Didn't ask what I'd done. Just helped. Daniel's throat tightened. I didn't get the chance to thank them, Victor added, his voice quieter now. So I don't waste chances anymore. The words settled into the space between them, heavy with meaning. Daniel's vision blurred as tears welled up, spilling over before he could stop them. He wiped at his face quickly, embarrassed, overwhelmed. I can't repay this, he said. Victor gave a small shrug. Good. Daniel blinked. Good. Means you won't try to turn it into a transaction, Victor replied. Just live. That's the deal. The administrator cleared her throat, drawing attention back to herself. The shift in power was undeniable now, but she clung to what remained of her role. We will begin the admission process, she said, her tone carefully measured. Treatment can start as soon as the oncology team is ready. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Immediately, the stillness in the clinic broke. Nurses moved quickly, gathering forms, preparing rooms, speaking in urgent but focused tones. The energy had changed completely, no longer stagnant, but alive, purposeful. Daniel stood in the middle of it all, still trying to process the sudden turn his life had taken. A nurse approached him gently. Sir, we need to get you ready. He nodded, though his eyes remained on Victor. Thank you, he said, the words barely enough to hold everything he felt. Victor stepped closer and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Make it count. Daniel swallowed hard and nodded again before allowing himself to be led away. One by one, the bikers began to leave. No celebration. No lingering. Just quiet, steady movement back toward the door. Their boots echoed against the floor, the same way they had when they entered, but now, the sound carried something different. Not disruption. Completion. Victor was the last to turn. At the doorway, he paused and looked back at the administrator, who stood behind her desk, the stack of envelopes still in front of her like a silent accusation. Next time, he said, his voice calm but carrying through the room, don't wait for us. She didn't respond. He stepped outside into the rain, pulling his helmet on as he walked toward his bike. The engines roared to life one after another, the sound rising and blending into something powerful, almost defiant. Inside the clinic, people moved faster, spoke softer, worked harder. And for the first time that day, it felt like a place where lives were actually being saved.